Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Sherrone Moore in Michigan continuing to work their way through fall camp. And as you get farther and farther into fall camp, you start to hear some more storylines that are emerging for this program. Now, storyline number one, and it's going to be that way until we kick off in 2025, is not only the quarterback battle, but I think more importantly for a lot of us Michigan fans, what does Bryce Underwood look like as a true freshman? Because that storyline has taken up so much of the airwaves in terms of how we talk about fall camp. You got some really big storylines that are flying under the radar. To me, most notably, Chip Lindsay coming in as the new offensive coordinator, what to expect from this Michigan offense. And as you work through fall camp a little bit more, you're starting to hear some more buzz around, hey, what to expect from Chip Lindsay as a play caller for Michigan in 2025. And, I think it's probably fair to say that a little bit dependent on who your starting quarterback is. You look at a guy like Bryce Underwood, and then you look at a guy like Mikey Keenan and say, not only is one a true freshman, one's a veteran quarterback, but just as importantly, two guys with different skill sets. And I think, at least in my opinion, one of the things I love the most about Chip Lindsay as an offensive coordinator, as an offensive play caller, is he's a guy that molds his offense to the skill set of his players. And so you're probably waiting to figure out, hey, who's our starting quarterback so we can really formulate our offensive identity. But you are starting to hear some buzz around, hey, what are we expecting from the Chip Lindsay offense? What does it look like in fall camp? I want to talk about some growing reasons to believe in this Michigan offensive line, which another sneaky storyline. I mean, go back to 2024. That was not the standard of offensive line play that many Michigan fans have been used to seeing over the last 5 years. Can Michigan get back to that in 2025? And, maybe I got some amazing blue tinted glasses on, but I think there are a growing number of reasons to believe in this offensive line taking the step from the 2024 year. And then you look at the defensive side of the football, you continue to hear some buzz around some players that are taking the step going into 2025. And that's the storyline for this Michigan defense. We know it's going to be good. How good is it going to be, I think, is very dependent on some players taking that step in 2025. We're hearing the right things about some of these players rolling into 2025 as well. I'm fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, the Michigan fans, appreciate you guys. As a Michigan fan myself, it has been a blast talking this football team. The amount of support many of y'all have shown the boys going back to summer commitments, rolling into fall camp. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it now. The Chip Lindsay offense. One of the, I think, bigger misconceptions that a lot of the national media has regarding this Michigan offense is that it's going to go away from the run game. That is certainly not going to be the case. And look, Sherrone Moore was not hiring an offensive coordinator that didn't want to run the football. That's just going to be the identity of this Michigan team as long as Sherrone Moore is running this Michigan program. And quite frankly, I'm okay with it as a Michigan fan because that was the identity that brought Michigan a national championship in 2023, controlling the line of scrimmage, playing really good defense. Now, the difference between that 2023 offense and the offense that we saw in 2024 was, you had a top 10 quarterback in 2023, but more importantly, you had some verticality in your passing attack. You had a passing attack that you could lean on to help your run game have a little bit more room to breathe along the line of scrimmage. I mean, go back to the 2024 year and say, because you could not push the ball 20 plus yards down the field consistently, you were pretty consistently running into 8-9 man boxes because these opposing defenses had very little respect for what Michigan could do in the passing attack. Now, I think the ideal scenario for Michigan in 2025 is not that we come out and throw the football 65% of the time and throw for 400 yards a game. That's just not how this Michigan offense is built. But if you can have a passing attack that strikes fear into an opposing defense, that makes them leave their two safeties high, that gives you a little bit more ability to run the football, that is the ideal scenario for Michigan in 2025, especially when you have a true freshman quarterback. You want to make Bryce Underwood's job as easy as possible. You want to get him comfortable. The best way to do that is give him a run game to lean on. The biggest difference you're going to see with Chip Lindsay, at least from kind of what you're hearing during fall camp, is we go and run the football. I mean, go look at some of the best players that we have on this offense are Jordan Marshall, Justice Haynes, and what Bryce Underwood can do in the run game as well. We're going to lean into our best football players on offense. That is what Chip Lindsay has told us he's going to do. Can you push the ball down the field effective enough to allow this running game to reach their potential in 2025? Can you give them a little bit more space along the lines of scrimmage to really get the run game going? That was something we didn't have in 2024. Now, it's going to look a little bit different. You're going to see a little bit more spread. I mean, you go back to Kirk Campbell in 2024, a lot of two tight end sets, a lot of really condensed formations that just did not give Michigan a ton of space to run the football. You go to Chip Lindsay and say, hey, we go in wide splits. We are going to spread this opposing defense out and ideally manufacture a little bit more space in the middle of the field, especially in the front seven, so we can run the football more effectively in 2025. As much as we want to talk about Bryce and we want to talk about this Michigan passing attack, the engine of this offense is pretty dang clear to me. And that is Jordan Marshall, Justice Haynes, and ideally this offensive line taking a step. Now, it's one thing to get up here and say, we going to run the football, and I truly believe that we have the pieces in the backfield to do so. The offensive line has to take a step. Now, what are the reasons to believe this offensive line takes a step? Number one, I firmly believe this, a little bit more experience and continuity along the line of scrimmage. I mean, Michigan, after that national championship year in 2023, had to replace their top 6 offensive linemen. And so though we had some, quote unquote, experienced offensive linemen waiting in the wings, guys like Giovanni El-Hadi, guys like Greg Crippen, they hadn't played much football for Michigan. And we had some young guys like Evan Link that were probably thrusted into duty a little bit more quickly than Michigan would have wanted. Going into 2025, that continuity is there. I mean, Greg Crippen coming back for year 5. Gio El-Hadi coming back for year 5. Evan Link has a year of starting experience under his belt. The experience and continuity, a lot of these guys have an experience playing together. That certainly matters. Just as importantly, one of the more underrated storylines that we had in the offseason was Juan Castillo coming in. He's one of the best offensive line coaches in the sport, in my opinion. He's coming in as an assistant to help Grant Newsome. And you kind of heard that throughout the program. Look, Grant Newsome, as much as I think he is a young, bright coach, that was his first year coaching the offensive line as a young cat. You could tell there wasn't the chain between the coaching staff and the players was not great. Juan Castillo coming in and kind of helping that coaching staff grab a hold of this offensive line, I think that matters. Look, it's maybe a storyline that doesn't get talked enough about, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but go look at Nick Saban and what he did at Alabama, why he was so successful for a decade at Alabama. To me, was that the coaching staff was absolutely elite around him. And I think he made a really good addition with Juan Castillo. You are starting to hear that from the Michigan players, too, on the offensive line. That matters. The last thing that I'll note is it's a deeper unit. You have more potential answers. You have more players that are above the line. In the same way we talk about the defensive line, like more guys Michigan trusts to play on the defensive line, better depth. I think you have that on the offensive line as well, along with some young talent that gives you monster upside. You go back to Michigan in 2024 and say it was a unit that on paper was solid, but you probably didn't have 7, 8 guys that you trusted to play. You had probably 5 or 6. Now I think that number's pushing 8 or 9. But more importantly, you have a guy like Andrew Sprague, who sounds like he's taken a monster step and has the opportunity to be an all Big Ten offensive tackle. You have a battle between Evan Link and Andrew Babelow, and we all know the ceiling that Babs gives this offensive line. Go back to last year, and this ain't a shot at a guy like Josh Preeb. It's just that there's a reason that those guys were not top 50 NFL draft picks. You got a couple of guys that have the ability to be first-round NFL draft picks on this offensive line, especially at the offensive tackle position. Now you combine all the things that we just said with, look, this offensive line got better throughout the 2024 year. Can they pick up where they left off? Maybe this offensive line takes a step. And I truly believe that that is going to be one of the biggest storylines for Michigan on offense. As much as we want to talk about Bryce, if we do not give Bryce a run game to lean on and we don't keep him clean in the pocket, that's how the train gets off the tracks. Pretty consistent narrative, not only from the program, but I kind of believe this as well, is we know Bryce Underwood's good enough. I think the bigger question for this Michigan offense is not what Bryce Underwood is going to be, but what's around Bryce Underwood. Does he have enough tools around him to have success as a year one quarterback? Because you go back and look at the freshman quarterbacks, true freshman quarterbacks that had success immediately. You know, the first name you probably go to is a guy like Trevor Lawrence. Well, you go to Trevor Lawrence and say, hey, that offense around him was elite. You know, he stepped into an offense that had all the pieces around him for him to be successful right away. Does Michigan have that? I think it starts with the offensive line. I think it starts with the run game. We still got question marks at wide receiver, and we ain't going to get those question marks answered until we see 2025. Now, as much as I think a lot of Michigan fans are in wait and see mode along with myself, this is the one thing that gives me some optimism. And that is, although maybe you don't have that top 10 NFL draft pick, heck, I don't even know if you have a top 100 draft pick in this wide receiver room, you got a bunch of guys that can do some different things, right? You got a guy like Donovan McCulley who goes 6'5", 215 that can work vertically down the field. Really good stretching the field, really good in those contested catch situations. You got a guy like Freddie Moore, who I think is really good in the intermediate portions of the football field. Then you have a guy like Samaj Morgan. You have a guy like Anthony Simpson coming from UMass who are really, really good after the catch. And so you might not have that one true wide receiver one that can do it all at a very high level. You got a bunch of guys that can provide different skill sets. And if you can use those guys and put them in spots where they can be successful, maybe this wide receiver room can be a little bit better than we expect going into 2025. I think the general take on the offense is we're still going to lean on the engine of this team, and that is ideally running the football with a couple of really good running backs, including a quarterback that can do so, and an offensive line that can move people off the line of scrimmage. We need a passing attack to supplement the rushing attack. Ain't no question about that, because we all saw what it looked like in 2024 when you don't have a passing attack. Can the passing attack be good enough to allow this run game to really cook in 2025? Defensive side of the football, we've talked about a bunch of storylines, the depth on the defensive line and Dom Nichols and Cam Brand stepping up. Jair Hill taking the step. I'll say one thing about Jair Hill that I think some Michigan fans, maybe shouldn't say Michigan fans, the national media probably doesn't appreciate, and that is how good he was in 2024. As much as there were a few bad plays, you go back to that Texas game and say, all right, Jair Hill was not very good in that football game. Jair Hill was pretty dang good throughout the rest of the 2024 year. And now can he take the question with Jair Hill is we know he's a good cornerback. Can he take that step and become a first-round NFL draft pick? That's not a crazy statement to make if you're a Michigan fan. Why is that so big? We all saw in 2023 when you have a guy like Will Johnson, who is just an eraser cornerback, one that you can put on the boundary and kind of just forget about. It is such a big asset to a defensive play caller when you can trust your cornerbacks and you have one real stud on the outside. Can Jair Hill be that guy for Michigan in 2025? Because if you get Jair Hill taking that step, all of a sudden you can get really, really dang creative with some of your other second level and third level defenders. Hey, we can start walking Brandon Hillman into the box. We can start sending a little bit more pressure packages because we feel like we can trust our cornerbacks on the boundary. Look at Michigan's schedule in 2025. There are a lot of teams that have difference makers at wide receiver. You look at Ohio State at the end of the year. You look at a team like USC. You look at a team like Washington. If you have that cornerback one that is an eraser that can really deal with whoever that wide receiver one is going to be, that matters. That matters in a big time way. And it sounds like Jair Hill has taken that step. The biggest benefitter, and I don't even know if that's a word, but we're going to go with it. is going to be Wink Martindale and what he can do from a play calling standpoint. I don't know if he had a ton of trust in his cornerbacks at times last year. If you have those trust in a guy like Jair Hill and Zeke Berry at the cornerback 2 spot, you can start getting really dang creative with what you want to be on the defensive side of the football. Love what we're hearing from Jair Hill going into year 3. Kind of expect him to be a first-team all-conference guy for Michigan at the cornerback spot. We'll close it down there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.